Hi everyone, and welcome to our full-length video, start to finish, how to sew our new Charm Patterns Esther Swimsuit. I'm so excited to be releasing this pattern with Charm. I know you guys have been suspecting that we've been working on a swimsuit for quite a while, and we have been behind the scenes. And what I'm so excited about with Esther is that it really comes from my research into 50s era swimsuits. And the materials that were available in the 50s to make swimsuits were very different from what we have now. So I spent a lot of time adapting the materials we're using, the pattern, all of that to get you a beautiful, structured, streamlined silhouette with a modern pattern and modern materials. The inspiration for the Esther swimsuit is, of course, Esther Williams, the $1 Million Mermaid, also known as the bathing beauty of the 40s and 50s, who did these elaborate movies with synchronized swimming scenes, and they have to be seen to be believed. So if you have time, just Google Esther Williams and just dive in to the glory of all of her swimming scenes. The other inspiration was my favorite swimwear designer from the 50s, which was Rosemary Reed. So if you've come across any of her vintage suits on Etsy or in a shop, for instance, you might notice how expensive they are. They're highly collectible, very rare items today, and I've spent a lot of time studying the few that I've collected, and her whole outlook and philosophy on swimwear was that a swimsuit should be designed like an evening gown. And she believed that it should have structure and boning and bra cups and really give you the figure that a structured bodice in an evening gown would. So I spent a lot of time studying her suits and was able to adapt some of her techniques and ideas about construction into the Esther swimsuit. But I use, modern swimwear fabrics. So this isn't one of those vintage swimsuits that is made out of cotton or something like that, and you really can't swim in it. This is actually made out of swimwear fabrics, but we've incorporated some tricks to really give you this beautiful, structured bodice with a lot of control to it and a lot of support in the bust, because I know that's really important in swimwear. So a little bit more about bust support. I feel like it's a bit of a misconception that you need underwire like a bra in a swimsuit for it to be super supportive. We spent a lot of time researching what makes a supportive swimsuit. And the answer is having a really strong band like you would in a bra. So this is all underlined with heavy power mesh to really give you the feeling of support throughout the bust. There's also an interior bra which has foam cups inside of it. I'm going to show you how to make your own foam cups, and it's really fun, don't be scared. And that also has elastic at the bottom of the interior bra, which is a little bit smaller than the suit itself, so it's going to give you that control there. And then the other thing is, if you're concerned about bust support, I would really recommend choosing the shoulder strap option. All the straps are underlined with that heavy power mesh again, so having two shoulder straps that are very sturdy are going to give you a ton of support in the bust. So it's not underwire. Underwire is more about giving you a separated shape, which isn't really a vintage look so much. So we gave you this very vintage shaped cup here, and then we focused on giving you band support and strap support. And this is all, of course, you can be custom fit. And if you feel like you're not getting enough support back here, make this section smaller so you really feel like you've got a lot of bust support in this suit. The Esther swimsuit has interchangeable parts, like all of our charm patterns. We know you love options. So what we have is a similar bodice for all of them. You can see these two suits that I'm standing next to. The bodice pieces are very similar to each other, but then you have a few different strap options. Obviously, you can go strapless, like this one here. We have a tie halter strap, a regular halter strap, and then shoulder straps. And then we've also given you some different bottom options. And let me just actually turn this around here so you can see the back here. They all have the same bra back closure in the back and then hook and eye closure so that you can, of course, get into your swimsuit down here. And then your bottom options would be this fabulous bloomer, which is included in the main charm pattern. Bloomers were really a big thing for Rosemary Reed, and I knew I had to incorporate them. They're so flattering, so if you're scared, don't be. These are so flattering on so many different figure types. You have your bloomer. We also have the skirt, which is so cute, and then the panty, which goes under the skirt, but you can also just attach the panty on its own if you really want more of just a regular tank swimsuit look. And then, of course, for your Patreon expansion this month, we have the ruched side bottom. And that one I feel is really special because ruching is a design technique that you see a lot in vintage swimsuits. And it kind of gives you nice curves and gives, you know, the illusion of, you know, really shapely hips. And it's just like a really lovely option that just screams vintage. So I wanted to make sure that we made that exclusive. So I knew that it would really benefit you all to have a full-length video showing you how to make this start to finish, because I know swimwear is a new skill to a lot of people. So for Patreon this month, what you're getting as your downloadable pattern is the ruched bottom. Okay, so that's an expansion that gives you one more bottom variation for the Esther swimsuit. And then what we really want to do for your video this month is exclusive to you wonderful, beautiful patrons, give you the full length video on how to sew the Esther swimsuit start to finish. I'm gonna hold your hand through every step, okay? And that's the most important thing about sewing swimwear to me, is just take it one step at a time. Don't get overwhelmed by the big picture. So just relax, and we're gonna get right into how to source your supplies, and then we're gonna start sewing. All right, let's get right into talking about supplies. So first of all, let's talk machine needles. You should have a stretch needle or a jersey needle handy. And my biggest tip about this is that you just want to have both. Like, I recommend, you know, when you're ordering needles or you go to your local shop, just get both stretch and jersey. What I've noticed is that, you know, some fabrics respond well to stretch, others you'll get skip stitches, and then you try the jersey and you're fine, or vice versa. So just have both on hand, and but you definitely need something that's meant for knit and lycra blend fabrics. Okay, so you have that. And then in terms of thread, just your regular all-purpose polyester thread is fine. I would not use cotton thread in this because it will degrade quicker, especially when it's exposed to things like chlorine and salt water and stuff like that. So make sure you go for 100% polyester thread for your swimsuit. And then let's talk about more general supplies. You are going to need some hook and eye tape for the back closure. And by the way, we're gonna be linking you to where we got all of these supplies on the Charm blog. So check that out if you're looking to just find quick links for places to purchase this. So hook and eye tape, that's for the lower back closure. You will want a swimwear closure, and we found these cool ones with rhinestones on Etsy. So ours are about an inch. You can go a little bit smaller, like 7/8 of an inch, or a little bit bigger, you know, 1 1/8, 1 1/4, because you can, you know, you can scrunch a little bit more fabric in there. There's Hattie. It's slightly adjustable, so don't worry if you're, Hattie, please, we're filming. Don't worry if you're slightly off on the closure size. I'll also say there are a lot of really fun closures and swimwear notions on Etsy. And in your local supply shop, you'll probably only find those like plastic S hooks, which work fine, but they're just not as fun. So something to note. You also need swimwear elastic, okay? And I really recommend opting for the specialty swimwear elastic, especially if this is a suit that you're going to be swimming in a lot. And I know that sounds silly, but I know some people might be making this more as like a burlesque number, or maybe just to kind of lounge at the beach. If you're really thinking of doing some serious swimming in it, again, chlorine, salt water, all of that can be pretty hard on materials. So there is a specialty swimwear elastic that is blended with rubber. For the majority of the suit, you need elastic that is 3/8 of an inch wide. This goes in the legs on the panty. If you're doing the bloomer, you'll need a 1/4 inch wide. Also, spiral steel boning. Okay, so we use boning in the bra cup and also on the side seams. This is optional. You can get support without it. So, you know, if you're just not feeling it or you're intimidated by the boning, you could skip it on your first one. I will say it gives your suit a lot of support, especially those side seams. If you're really trying to get that sleek, streamlined look, the spiral steel boning is great for that. Also, because I know you're thinking this, does it rust? You know, I get that question all the time because I, hand wash my dresses with spiral steel boning. And the answer is that it does not. It is specialty treated to be waterproof, rust proof, all of that. And we even did a little test here in the studio where we submerged some boning in water for 3 straight weeks and then put it on some fabric to see if it would discolor it or have any rust or anything. And nothing happened. So, unless you're planning on submerging yourself and your suit in water for longer than 3 weeks, we can pretty much guarantee that it's going to be fine. Okay, so in terms of the spiral steel boning, you're also going to want a casing. So I use this 1/2 inch wide twill casing. It's like a tube to put the boning in. So we'll give you a source for that. And then something to finish the ends of your boning with. I use these little steel caps sometimes, but you probably know if you've watched my L'Amour dress class, which is on YouTube for free. If you're new to spiral steel boning, check out the chapter on boning your bodice for the L'Amour dress class because it takes you through using spiral steel boning start to finish and will help you feel a little more comfortable with this. If you watch that class, you know that my favorite way to finish the ends of boning is to use Teflon tape, also known as plumbing tape, which you can get at your local hardware store, and you just wrap it around the ends of the bones. All right, so you have that. We've been over these. Okay, let's talk fabrics. Now, this is the big topic for swimwear. So, we are using, because of what you can get on the market these days for swimwear is essentially spandex fabric. If you just say spandex, you think of this type of fabric, and this is what people use for swimsuits. It's an 80-20 blend, and usually it's 80% poly or nylon, and then blended with 20% lycra, okay? So that's what you're looking for, very stretchy. Now, the problem with this fabric for the type of suit that we're making today that has a lot of structure, a lot of support, is that it's too stretchy, too soft. So I went through a lot of tests on this swimsuit, and what I found was that using a layer of heavy power mesh, very sturdy power mesh, layered with the spandex, replicates a vintage fabric. These vintage suits were made from a fabric called Lastex, which is not available anymore, unfortunately, because it was super sturdy, had a lot of stretch to it, a lot of control to it, and I wish we could all get in a time machine and go back to 1952 and buy yardage of it, but it does not exist anymore. And the closest thing I could get to replicating Lastex in a swim-friendly fabric was these two fabrics layered together. So your spandex and then a heavy power mesh. I will tell you that all power meshes are not created equal. I ordered a bunch online, and this was the only one that said it had high control that I felt like actually had a lot of control to it. It was very firm. So we have a source for that that's very, very reliable, and we of course will share that with you as well, but you're looking for this kind of firmness to it. If you're not sure if your fabric is replicating ours, the way to figure it out would be through stretch percentage, okay? So we've been through Barbie at this point, we've been through Skipper together. Hopefully you've started to get a sense of what stretch percentage means. It is when you take your fabrics layered together, and you're gonna take, let's say you take 2 inches of it. So I would have a gridded ruler handy, which I don't have, but just pretend I have one. That I would stretch it out, and it should stretch to no more than 3 inches. Okay, if you take 2 inches and it stretches to 3 inches, that means that your fabric has 50% stretch. What we're calling for on this pattern is 35% to 50% stretch. And just to give you an idea of how different that is from regular swimwear, this has like 75% stretch. okay? So really pay attention to those stretch percentages when you're layering your fabrics together. If you make this swimsuit in a fabric with 75% stretch, like you don't use this layering technique, or you don't use a lower stretch fabric, then it's going to fit so differently than we intended. It's going to be too big. It's not going to give you any control. So if I can impart any wisdom to you about what to look for in fabrics, it's to look at these stretch percentages and to really take seriously what I'm saying about layering these two fabrics together, because this is what's going to give you that vintage look. All right, on to the other fabrics. So you also will need a swimwear lining for some of the bottoms. The panty and the ruched panty and the bloomer, yes, those three bottoms all use a lining fabric like this. This is a swimwear lining, and it's just, it comes in usually a few flesh tones and black and white, and it just provides a layer of opacity to your swimwear. So you'll want to have some of that on hand. Again, we'll give you the source for that. And then the final thing, which is a specialty supply for swimwear, is this thin foam, which is called polylaminate foam for some reason, and not very sexy sounding, but that's what it's called. We will give you the source for this. It's a very thin layer of foam, and you can buy it as yardage and then cut your own cups out of it. So we're gonna be making a 3-piece bra cup out of this. And the benefit of this is that it's super light, not bulky. It still gives you shape without adding a lot of bulk. So don't worry if you're thinking, I don't want a padded bra. This is not going to give you the appearance of a lot of extra bulk. So it's really great to be able to make your own custom bra cups. And I can tell you it's really fun too. So I'm excited for when we get to that chapter. Okay, I think those are all our supplies. Let's move on to just a quick little chat about the pattern. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the pattern. I like to take you on a little educational journey. And because this pattern has so many pieces, I know it might be easy to look at them and get really overwhelmed and think I'm not going to sew that. And I don't want you to do that. So I'm going to take you through what all the different bodice pieces are, because there are a lot of different smaller pieces. First of all, I'll say that this pattern, of course, has cup sizes, and it has 5 different cup sizes. There aren't the groupings like you might have seen in the gardener top, for instance, okay? So for every bodice piece, there's going to be a different piece for your A cup, your B/C cup, D/double D, F and G, and then H, okay? So when you open up your tissue or open up your PDF, you're gonna see a ton of cup pieces, and you just need to find the ones for the cup size that you are making, of course, all right? So that will start to narrow down the pieces you have to worry about. All right, so let's look at these bodice pieces, which I've laid out in the little doll size over here. Now, if you look from here down, what we're seeing is essentially the bodice from center front to center back, okay? It's kind of crazy looking, but it's really cool, I promise. All right, so we always, of course, only have one side of the pattern if it's a symmetrical pattern. So that's why we have center front here going to center back. Another thing to know is that we always orient our patterns so that you're working with the right side of the body. So if you're ever not sure, like, which side does this go on, it's always going to be the right side of your body that our symmetrical pattern pieces are drafted for, okay? So let's just start with this upper cup here. This is that band that goes on the bust right here. And then these lower 2 pieces are the princess seam pieces that create the rest of the bodice. All right, so center front and then side front. And now hopefully what you can see here is these notches that look like a princess seam, because they are a princess seam, right? We have a princess seam going down the bodice. And this swimsuit has a basque waist, which means that it comes to that princess point at center front, which is very 50s, very Rosemary Reed detail for swimsuits. So I knew I had to include that. So that's what that point there is. These pieces get sewn together, sewn to the upper cup. And these are the back pieces here. Now, this is what I really wanted to talk to you about, is this crazy piece right here. This is the lower back where the hook and eye gets applied here. Now, the reason this side seam looks so crazy is because I really wanted the side seams to wrap around the body towards the front. So they go on a diagonal here. The reason for that is that there is optional boning in that side seam. And for something like a swimsuit, it's not so comfortable to have boning that's going to be poking you right in your hip when you bend. So I wanted to make sure that the boning would kind of wrap around the body here, and that when it's on the boning is on the diagonal, so that when you bend to the side, you don't even feel it. It also kind of provides a cool visual piece of interest. And you could play around with it by doing some color blocking here so that you would see it kind of wrap around to the side. Is a fun idea. Now, the really important thing to note about this piece is that we have this wacky side seam now, which does not match the side seam on the bottoms, okay? Because we didn't want the bottoms to wrap around to the front in that way. So this notch here on the bottom is actually the side seam, and that's what's going to meet the side seams on the bottom. Of course, we will take you through that when we get to bottoms later in the video, so don't worry too much about it, but just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Okay, so we have that, and then this is the bra back, the piece where that our fancy little clasp gets sewn into, and these two pieces get sewn to the side front, right? And then they just meet at the side seam here. And then this little rectangular piece is called a hook and eye guard, okay? So it forms a little underlap, almost like a modesty panel on a corset if you're into corsets, so that you don't see skin behind the hook and eye if they stretch open. But we'll talk more about that construction later. All right, so hopefully all those pieces make sense to you. And then there are more cut pieces. So you're like, why do I have all these cut pieces? Let me tell you why. We also have a bra inside the suit, right? We have that interior bra that's going to give you that great support. Now, that ends right under the bust like a regular bra. And so you're going to need to reuse this main upper cup piece to cut out your lining. And I just use self spandex fabric for the lining. That's going to be your upper cup. And then you have the center front lower cup, side lower cup for the bra, okay? And so when these three pieces get sewn together, they form one cup, and it's a three-piece cup like you might have on some of your day-to-day bras at home, okay? And then you see that there's another cup over here, and you're thinking, this is getting ridiculous, and I'm gonna tell you why. Again, we have another cup. This one is just for the foam pieces, okay? So you're gonna cut this only in your polylaminate foam. And the reason these look smaller is because they don't have seam allowances on them at all. We're just gonna put those edges together, butt them together, and zigzag them together so they don't need seam allowances. Okay, so these pieces you just cut in the foam. The lining pieces, you're just gonna cut in your spandex. And then for the other pieces, it will tell you, of course, on each piece what you're going to be cutting it in. But for most of these, you're gonna be cutting a layer of spandex, a layer of your heavy power mesh, and then some of them have multiple layers of spandex as well. So like for instance, the bra back will say cut 4 spandex, or cut 4 fabric. And by fabric, we mean your spandex swimwear fabric. Cut 2 power mesh. Okay, so just go by the cutting layout that we give you on the pattern pieces themselves. It's also in the book. Also, make a muslin first, okay? Use a cheap swimwear fabric layered with your power mesh. Make sure it has the same stretch percentage that your final fabric is going to have. Make an initial version. It will help you get familiar with all of the techniques that we're going to be doing today. And also it will help you know if you need to make any adjustments, like going up or down a size, up or down a cup size, or changing the length, for instance. All right, so once you're happy with your fit, you're ready to move into sewing, and that's what we're going to do next. Okay, let's get started sewing. So let me talk about how I prepped my pieces. These are my bodice pieces. I'm gonna be doing a a contrast upper cup. You might have seen in some of our photo samples. It looks really cute to do a, like for instance, a white upper cup to give that look of a band that was really popular in the 50s to contrast with the rest of the suit. So that's what I'm doing today. Found this really cute pink polka dot fabric. We'll of course link you to the source for that as always. And I want to show you that I have already underlined these pieces in the heavy power mesh, okay? And so you just cut these pieces, you know, cut one in the spandex, cut one in the power mesh, layer them together. Now, I would really, really strongly recommend when you layer them together, put the power mesh on top, pin them together around the edges, matching the outer edges, and then zigzag them together like you see here around the outer edges using, like, you know, 3/8 of an inch to a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and zigzag them together. The power mesh on top is going to help stabilize the whole thing. These fabrics can be a little bit tricky to work with together because they kind of stretch against each other. You can get puckers. I will tell you that working with the firmest fabric on top is the #1 tip that I can give you to help you feel like things are more stable when you're sewing. The other thing I can tell you is if you have a machine with adjustable presser foot pressure, that's one of these little dials right here that adjusts how tightly the presser foot is clamping down on the fabric. That can really help too, because you'll want to set it to be slightly lighter on the fabric so that it doesn't kind of like push the spandex and get those little wrinkles and stuff like that, okay? So you could also try a walking foot if you have one of those at home. Okay, so let's get started sewing these pieces together. Oh wait, there's one more thing I want to mention to you guys, which is that on my upper cup, I actually did 2 layers of the white. And that's just a choice that I made because I felt like all the whites I was finding, the white fabric I was finding was a little bit sheer, and then I could see the beigey power mesh underneath. So I just did an extra layer of white, and you can of course do that as well and just underline them all together. Okay, so actually the first thing we're going to do is sew the princess seam on the lower bodice. So you can put these right sides together. This is the center front piece here, and then the side piece. Match those princess seam notches. And now on this princess seam, you don't really have to do a lot of notching and clipping like I've probably shown you how to do in videos before. This one has a really easy to sew shape without opposing curves. Okay, so just continue pinning along that princess seam. And there we go. And now we're going to sew these 2 together. Now on this seam, you can actually use a straight stitch. We're going to be using different stitches throughout the swimsuit, and it all depends on whether the seam needs to stretch or not. This seam is going to be highly stabilized with the top stitching we're going to do in the next step, so it wouldn't make any sense to do a zigzag here because we would just negate it with the top stitching. So you can just use a regular straight stitch. You're using your 5/8 of an inch seam allowance here. Back stitching and just sewing the seam. I'm just making sure I don't have any ripples underneath there. I'm going to back stitch and trim my rivets. Okay, so you can see, hopefully you can see how this is starting to come together here. This piece goes right here. Our bra band is going to be up here, and then this is our center front point. Okay, so this is 1/2 of the lower bodice. Now, Swimwear doesn't really require a lot of pressing either. We'll be using an iron sort of here and there, but on these seams you don't need to do any pressing because of what we're going to do next, which I'm really excited to show you. We've been in the studio, we've been calling this lingerie stitching for some reason, because I was thinking about how bras are sewn. You know, when you sew a bra, you sew the seam and then you kind of finger press the seam open, and then you top stitch 1/8 of an inch to either side of the cup, right? So to either side of the seam. So look at your bras in your underwear drawer at home and you'll see what I'm talking about. And it helps the seam stay open, not getting any of this bunching here. So that's what we're gonna do on this. So I'm gonna show you. You're just gonna hold these seam allowances open like this. You don't need to press them. We're gonna go right to the machine and using a straight stitch. Now you can go a little bit longer on your stitch if you like 3 millimeters would be fine. And we're going to stitch just 1/8 of an inch to the side of the seam. We're gonna stitch on both sides, and I'm starting to the right of the seam. And you just need to kind of hold the seam open so it's nice and taut. Okay, so I'm stitching just to the side of this seam. I'm going to continue like this all the way down the seam. Okay, so I finished my first line of top stitching. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing. Whoops, got caught on the needle. Exact same thing on the other side of the seam. So now to the left side of the seam, exact same thing that we just did, just holding that seam nice and taut and stitching with a straight stitch about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam line. Now you can kind of see how this beautiful seam is really starting to take shape, which is really cool. So what we can do now is trim away any excess from behind on these seam allowances from the wrong side. I would say just trim about 1/8 of an inch away from your top stitching. So I love this lingerie seaming for a lot of reasons, but one of them is that it really holds your seams nice and taut, and it also reduces any bulk. And we don't need to do any seam finishing. And you might be noticing I'm doing everything on my sewing machine. We don't need a serger at all for this project, so we're just using a variety of stitches, straight stitches, and then different widths of zigzag, and that's it. Okay, so see, nice neat seam finish there. And now we're going to sew the upper cup. Okay, so you may have noticed this already, but what we're doing is we're constructing one side of the bodice, and then we're going to construct the other side and then seam them together at center front, okay? You don't want to seam this at center front yet because we need to attach the upper cup first. All right, so this is my upper cup, and we are going to put these right sides together. They're notches to help you figure out which side goes on, which cup goes on which side, upper cup. So there is a notch right here that goes to the underarm. So if you're not sure if this is the center front or the underarm, that notch means that it's the underarm. There's also a notch which matches up to the princess seam. So I'm going to start by matching my notch at the princess seam. I'm going to match my underarm notch. It's a bit of a curve right here, so just match those raw edges. And then match it center front. Now this is one of those places where there is a little excess seam allowance here because this is such a sharp point. So as I always say on these videos, I feel like I say this every month, but you're looking for the points to match at the 5/8 of an inch seam line, okay? So if it's not matching here, that's fine. It just needs to match where you're going to be stitching. All right. So you can, this gets me very excited every time. You can see how this is gonna come together. All right, so again, we're using that straight stitch. 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Up at that 5/8 of an inch point, back stitching. Ready to go right into that lingerie top stitching again. So I'm just finger pressing open that seam allowance, and I'm going to stitch on the upper cup side first, the white side. And there's a little excess thread. I'm just get rid of that. So remember, you want to be about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam line. Holding, and you're going to have to kind of what's the right word? Readjust the seam allowances as you go. And, you know, again, just hold them nice and taut. And you can see where we're coming up to this intersecting seam here. That's the princess seam on the lower bodice. Okay, I'm gonna repeat that on the other side of the seam. This is the pink side, or the lower bodice. And same thing on this seam that we did on the lower princess seam. We're going to trim away the excess on the wrong side. So just get in there with your scissors and trim that away. I like these little Kai scissors for this purpose. Great for trimming away seam allowances. Nice and sharp too, which is something you definitely want when doing this kind of detail work. And there we go. So this is exciting because we now have one full side of the outer bodice constructed. So you're going to do the same thing on the opposite side, and then you're going to sew that center front seam. So we'll come back and do that together. Okay, so you can see that I now have two sides of the bodice, and what we're going to do now is sew this center front seam. So you're going to put these right sides together. And again, you have notches to help you match. So I always like to start with my notches. I will say, you know, you want to be very careful here about matching that center front diagonal seam on the upper cup seam line, because you want those to match up beautifully into a nice little V shape. So I usually just put a pinpoint right through the center of the seam, open up the two pieces, and then continue pushing the pin through the center of the other seam. And then I know that they are like exactly matching those seam lines. Okay, and then we're gonna pin down to that basque point. And again, same seaming method. We're going to sew with a straight stitch, finger press open, and top stitch on either side of the seam. And here you definitely want to back stitch. And then just continue sewing. And here's where I want to be really careful, where I pin so carefully to not remove my pin until the very last moment. And you may notice here that there's a bit of, this isn't just a straight seam, actually, because of the cup shaping. There's a little bit of dip right here. So make sure that you're really following the shape of that seam line when you stitch. Go down to the bottom and then back stitch. Okay, and this is really fun because now we can see our center front. Look how beautiful that's looking. And now we're going to finger press these seams open and do that edge stitching or top stitching. You can use those terms interchangeably here. Top stitching 1/8 of an inch to either side of that seam line. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. I feel like you guys have got this down, right? So I'm gonna do the top stitching, trim away my seam allowances, and then we're ready to move on to the interior bra. Okay, we're now ready to construct our interior bra. So we're gonna start with 1 cup on the inside. And remember, your bra pieces just need to be cut out in your swimwear fabric. So that's what I have here. And you'll notice that I'm using the white for my upper cup on the interior bra as well. I don't want to, do the polka dots and then have the polka dots show through. So if you're doing a white upper band or a light color, make sure that you use that same color for the bra lining. Okay, so again, this is a 3-piece bra cup. The first seam you're going to sew is this center, what are we gonna call it? The vertical seam on the lower cup, okay? So take these 2 lower cup pieces and put them right sides together, and you have a double notch to match on the top here. These pieces can be really easy to get confused, which side goes up, what's the center front, etc. So I will tell you the thing that always helps me orient them is knowing that those 2 sets of notches, which you normally find on a princess seam, that is that the vertical seam on the lower cup. The other thing that helps me orient myself is this notch right here on the underarm, okay? So I know that that goes to the side rather than center front. All right, so on this seam, I'm going to be using a narrow zigzag stitch, and I'm about 1.5 on my zigzag width, and then around 3 on my length. But you can adjust your settings to whatever you prefer for a narrow zigzag. I'm going to back stitch here. And we're not doing that lingerie stitching on these seams. That would be a lot of top stitching throughout this suit. So we're gonna leave these and just press them open. So this is the first time you'll notice we've gotten our irons out. I'm using the ham since this is a curved seam. You can give it a little steam, but be warned that, high content spandex fabrics can be a little heat sensitive, so don't go crazy with the high heat and prolonged steam. Okay, that's now pressed open, and we are going to sew the upper cup to the lower cup. So again, you have a notch to match to the princess seam, which is that lower cup vertical seam. Start there. and then your underarm notch over here. So I always match my notches first and then distribute the fabric between the notches. And this is that funny little corner at center front that we've already discussed. Okay, so now we're gonna stitch the upper bra cup, and this should feel very familiar since you did it on the outer suit. But this time we are using our zigzag. I will say if you forget and use a straight stitch on these seams, it's not a huge deal. This part of the suit is not going to stretch, especially once we put the foam in there. So if you do end up using a straight stitch here, don't worry about it. I would say this suit is, you know, the way we designed it is different from a lot of different, you know, spandex garments or athletic wear garments, because not every part of the garment is going to stretch. So just keep that in mind. And the underarm curve is a little tricky on this seam, so just make sure that your raw edges stay aligned. Okay, and then back stitch. Okay, so look at that. One side of the cup, and now I'm going to press this open on the hem like we did on the lower cup seam. Let's just press that open and give it a little steam. Just all the way around the cup. And you can probably guess what you're going to do next, which is sew the other cup. I luckily already have the other side of my cup constructed, so I'm going to grab it. And you can see where the center front seam is here, right? Because again, those curvy sides with the notches are our underarms. So this is going to be our center front seam on the bra. I'm going to put these right sides together, and you can just make sure that those seam allowances stay pressed open. Spandex is a little finicky. Make sure those seams match. And we are going to sew this center front seam. If you would like to trim these seam allowances down, you certainly can. I'm going to leave mine the full 5/8 of an inch just because I feel like it's going to help them stay open in the next few steps. But whatever you feel more comfortable with is, it's, you know, totally fine. Okay, center front seam. Stitching at 5/8 of an inch, back stitching all the way to the beginning. I'm going to press this open. Very exciting. I now have a full interior bra lining. Obviously, we don't have any of the structure in here yet. So the next thing we're going to do, one of my favorite parts of sewing this suit, is to construct the foam cups. So that will be our next step. All right, everyone, it's time to sew your foam cups. I'm so excited to show this little technique to you. So anytime you need a little bit of structure in a cup and you have it like a 3-piece cup pattern, you can use this technique. Okay, so again, we're looking at these 3 pieces on our cup, lower cup pieces, and then the upper cup cut in the foam. Remember, there were special pattern pieces to cut out your foam yardage in. All right, so again, we have, hopefully you can see the double notch there and the single notch there. Instead of sewing these together like a regular seam where you put them right sides together, we're instead gonna butt these edges together and then zigzag across that gap there, okay? So it's really fun, and the reason it's so fun is you're gonna start to see these pieces start to take a three-dimensional shape as you're zigzagging them together. So what I'm going to do, put these under my presser foot, butting those edges together. I've set my machine on a wide zigzag, or I thought I did. Let's try this again. I really feel like, yeah, like at least 5 millimeters wide is good. I'm gonna backstitch here, and my zigzag is about 2.5 long. Okay, so as you sew this seam, just continue, see how I'm kind of moving my fingers this way to continue to butt the raw edges together here. And I have these notches as a guide, so I know that I'm matching them correctly. And maybe you can see on this side of the camera that it's starting to form a cup shape. And I'm gonna backstitch again. Okay. So this is my lower cup. I'm now going to put this together with my upper cup, and same thing. This curvy side matches, right? So here I'm going to butt those edges together, and it's really cool. All right, I just have to say again, it's really cool because see how different these shapes are if you tried to lay them flat together. But once we start to butt those edges together and zigzag, it's really cool how they fit together and start to form a three-dimensional shape. And again, here's another matching notch to help you just make sure that you're on the right track, the way the pieces go together. And my machine has a little triangle in the center of the presser foot, so I just align the middle of that seam with that little triangle, and then I know that that's at the center of the presser foot. And I should be aligned perfectly in the center of my zigzag. Okay, how cool is this? I have a fully formed cup now, one side. And so again, I've already constructed the other side. And the cool thing about these foam cups is it doesn't matter which is the right and wrong side. So I now see that this is the center front of this one, so I just need to pop that cup out the other way. So now they're gonna fit together like this. Okay, so this is gonna be my center front seam here. And I'm going to do the same thing by butting those raw edges together and zigzagging them to form the entire cup. And there's no pinning you can do here, so don't worry about pinning these together. You're just going to match them up and stitch. It's pretty fun. So we now have a beautifully shaped interior foam bra. All right, now that you have constructed your foam bra, the next thing we're going to do is add the boning channels. So if you would rather skip boning in your swimsuit, just skip these next steps, but I'm gonna show you how to do it. All right, so you're gonna take your channeling and we're going to apply channeling over the vertical seam on each cup. Okay, but it needs to go all the way to the top of the foam cup. So you can just pin it through here, center it over that lower vertical seaming, and then you can trim it at the bottom. And now we're going to edge stitch this channel in place. So you want to be using a straight stitch on your sewing machine. And we're going to edge stitch on both long sides of the channel. Start at the bottom and back, I'm sorry, start at the top and then back stitch. Get this out of the way. So a little less than 1/8 of an inch from each edge. More like a 16th really. As close to the edge as possible without stitching off. All right, so that's one side of the channel stitched, and I'm just gonna flip the whole thing around and stitch on the other side. And then we're gonna back stitch here. Okay, so now that we have our channel sewn onto our bra, next thing we're going to do is cut our boning to length to fit into the channel. So as I mentioned before, if you've seen like my L'Amour dress class, you know that I like to buy these long boning pieces with the finished ends, and then I'll already have one finished end. I just cut it to length, right? So you need to cut your boning so that it's about 1/4 of an inch in from the edge on both sides, because we're gonna need to stitch right here, okay? So obviously we need a little room where there's no boning. So I would say give yourself like 1/4 inch on the top and 1/4 inch on the bottom. And I'm actually using these little wire nips today because I don't have my favorite cutters in the studio today, which are the Greenlee 822 cutters. And so we have some furniture making shops here in our studio building, and I just went and borrowed these little wire nippers, which I think a lot of people have something like this at home already. And the way you have to cut the boning with these is a little bit different, so I'll just show you. See how the boning is in a spiral, right? We call it spiral steel, so it's a circle. You're going to just very delicately with the tip of these wire nips, cut one side at a time of the circle. And I actually have to use the table to help me, so I'll like press against the table, and when you hear that snap, I've cut one side only of the circle, okay? So now I need to turn it over and cut the opposite side using that same method. Snip. Nope. Okay, I cut it. These are not as good as the Greenlee 822. If you have some money in the budget, get yourself to Amazon and get some of those Greenlee cutters. And we'll put those in the supply list as well. Okay, so now I'm just going to put my boning cap on there. I also left my Teflon tape at home today. So I'm just gonna crimp one of these caps on the end. All right, now we've got it. Okay, once you have your boning cut to length and finished on both ends, you're going to insert it into your channel. So don't forget that you need to actually open, the channeling is a tube, right? So there are two sides to it, and you need to get in between the layers to insert your bone. Okay. So now you want to center that bone in the channel so that you have a little space on each end. And now we're going to close each end of the boning channel. And you're going to do this with a zipper foot so that you can stitch close to that bone without stitching over it. And I'm really excited because today I also have my new protective eyewear. You know, we always say, wear protective eyewear when you're stitching over anything metal. And we mean it.
So I got these fabulous protective glasses from Amazon. Okay, so I'm stitching as close to the boning as possible without stitching over it. And I like to use my hand wheel just to kind of test that I'm not about to stitch over metal. Okay, so there's one end of the channel is shut. We're going to do the same on the other end. Okay, and now that little bone can't go anywhere. All right, so you are going to repeat this on the other side of the cup, obviously, but you can see how now the cup has a lot more structure to it on this side. And you can also bend it a little to kind of round the shape out, or if you want like a super pointy shape, you know, very 50s, you can actually crease it right where your apex would be, or a little higher if you want to look a little perkier, that's fine too. So just give it a little crease, and now you can see how it's holding the shape of the cup in place. All right, so I'm gonna apply my boning channel on the other side, and then we'll come back and we're going to apply the whole foam boned unit to the bra lining. Okay, so now that my foam bra is fully constructed with my boning channels, and I'm gonna bend this one a little bit like I did the other one too before I put it together. Now we're going to stitch the foam bra to the bra lining. So that's this very floppy spandex only piece that we constructed a while back. Now you're going to put these with the foam cup facing the wrong side of the bra. And what you need to remember is that there are no seam allowances on the foam, and there are seam allowances on the bra itself, obviously. So we're going to place them together, but just remember that your foam is going to end 5/8 of an inch in from the edge of the lining fabric, the lining. So I'm just pinning these pieces together, making sure that the foam cup is in 5/8 of an inch from the edge of the spandex. Same thing on this side seam here. So I'm going to pin it all the way around, because the next thing we're going to do is stitch these two layers together. Now that I'm at the bottom, you kind of need to stretch the lining over the cup here. To make sure that your full seam allowance is exposed around the edges. Okay, so you're going to pin the whole thing together all the way around. And you can have these seam allowances on top of each other. I know we press them open, but I found, you know, just with some spandex, it is easier if they're pressed together. So if you're trying to press those seam allowances open and they're just not staying open, and you're like, you know what, let's just work with what the fabric wants to do, that is totally fine. And in that case, you may want to trim them down too. But I would say just kind of see what your fabric wants, and, you know, don't fight it if it's really giving you trouble. All right, so now we are going to stitch the foam to the lining around the edge using a straight stitch. So it really needs to be right on that edge there, no more than 1/8 of an inch in. And you're going to use your zipper foot, just because we're going to be stitching close to those boning channels again, and we don't want to stitch over metal. So I'm using this zipper foot, and I'm just stitching right on the edge of the foam to put these two pieces together. And now, as I'm coming up to my boning channel, just being very careful again, I'm stitching where I stitched last, so I know that I know there's no metal underneath there because we already stitched that. All right, so just keep going like this all the way around. And then we will come back and talk about how to apply the elastic to the bottom of the bra. So now that you have this lovely constructed bra lining, see how nice that looks on the inside. Now the final thing we need to do before setting the bra aside and moving on to other steps is to apply the elastic to the bottom of the bra. Now there are guidelines in the instructions for how long you need to cut this piece based on your size. I will tell you that our calculations are based on the elastic being 80% of the length that it's being sewn to. So you have to stretch it like this, and that's what helps give support at the lower edge. That said, you can customize this. So if you feel like you really need more support at the bottom and something that's gonna hold you tighter at the bottom of your bra, then cut your elastic shorter, okay? If you don't need that, then the number in the pattern should be just fine for you. But I would say that this is gonna give you plenty of support at the bottom of the bra. Okay, so the first thing I would do is make sure that this is the plush side of the elastic is facing your body. And so it should be right side up with the inside of the bra, right side up. So this is the inside that you'll see when you look inside the swimsuit, okay? So first thing I would do is fold this piece in half and find the center mark. And then that center mark will get pinned to the center front of the bra, just to help distribute this elastic. And you're going to, oops. The way the elastic is going to be placed here, it should be just below the line of stitching that you did when you were sewing the foam cup on. Okay, so we're going to start sewing at this edge using a zigzag and stretching it as we go. I'm going to use my protective eyewear again. I really like to, anytime you're going to be stitching anywhere close to boning, it's a good idea to use some eyewear. Or if you just wear glasses, you're already halfway there. Okay, so I'm going to start stitching at the edge. I'm using a regular zigzag stitch. And now that I'm anchored in there, so my stitch now is like 2.5 wide by 2.5 long, zigzag. So now you just need to stretch these pieces together as you stitch, and it kind of helps to grab it from the back here. So once you have a little fed through, then you'll be able to hold this nice and taut and stretch it. And you can even, if this is too unwieldy, which I'm finding it is a little bit right now, you can kind of divide the excess, you know, kind of come to that center seam and just work on a shorter length rather than trying to do the whole half of the bra all at once. So again, just continue to stretch and make sure that it's placed correctly right under your line of straight stitching from sewing the foam to the bra. And now we're at center front. And now you need to kind of continue to distribute and stretch. So I'm going to find the halfway point on my next stretch of stitching. And my zigzag is just along this upper edge of the plush elastic. When you get to the end, you can back stitch. Okay, so look at that. So hopefully you can see now that the bottom edge has a good bit of control there, and we are finished with the bra for now. So if you got to this point, congratulate yourself, because I know that the bra is a lot. It's a lot of little pieces, and you're really getting there on your swimsuit. So now we're going to move on to the back. All right, so our next step is to sew our straps. All right, so whichever strap you've chosen, you're going to follow the directions for how to sew them. I'm going to be showing the shoulder straps today, which are these shorter rectangular pieces. All right, and what I'm going to do is, you can see I have one sewn here and I'm going to sew the other, and these are underlined in the power mesh, just like everything else. If you don't underline these, you're going to get a lot of stretch in the strap and you just won't get a lot of support, and it'll actually probably be too long too. So just keep that in mind. It's especially for the support, it's a good idea to underline these straps. All right, I'm going to put these right sides together along that long edge and pin. And now when we sew the seam, we definitely want to be using a zigzag stitch because you want to have stretch in your straps, right? You don't want to bust any stitches when you, I don't know, spike a volleyball or whatever people do in swimsuits. Okay, so here we go. We're going to be zigzagging all along just this one long edge. And I'm going to grade my seam allowances on the strap. So just one of these sets of seam allowances you can trim down to about 1/4 inch or a little bit less is fine. And then the other seam allowance can be a little bit taller, like about 1/8 of an inch taller than the first. And that's so you don't get too much bulk from two seam allowances being the same length right on top of each other. It can give you like a little ridge on one side of your strap. Okay, and now we're going to turn this right side out. You could use a safety pin or something like that, you know, pin the safety pin to one end and then shimmy the safety pin through. I am going to be using this little loop turner. So I'm just putting the loop turner through the strap and then using the hook on this end to grab that edge. And now you have to just kind of turn this right side out from the very end. I always find loop turners a little bit awkward to use, but I felt like it mostly worked for this step to just use a loop turner. But like I said, you know, some people really like to use things like a dull knitting needle or a chopstick or something like that, where you can just kind of poke it through one end and to get the tube right side out. All right, and then once you can kind of grab the end, you should. Here, and then you can just kind of turn the whole thing through. And then you can take that loop turner out. And voila. Okay, now we can press this flat. So when you're pressing this flat, I would try to, you know, just push that seam out as far to the edge as possible. And also because there are, you know, several layers in here now, I like to just kind of run my fingers over it and make sure that there's no little wrinkles or ripples or anything in the power mesh underneath. It's all nice and smooth. And now we're going to, oops, just roll that seam line as far to the edge as it will go. And don't leave the iron on on the piece for too long at any one time. But you can give it some steam and just kind of keep moving it quickly. And there, that will be the right side of that strap. And I'm actually going to press this one a little bit better now. and just check for those power mesh wrinkles underneath there. You can also, if you feel like the layers aren't that smooth in there, you can go back in with your knitting needle or your loop turner and kind of smooth them out with the point of the tool. And there we go. You can kind of see that I tried to make the seam line at the edge of one side of the strap so that when you turn it over, you don't see the seam line from this side. And now this will be the side that kind of faces the world, right? So now the seam line is closer to my body. Okay, now we're going to baste these to our outer bodice. Remember this piece? So what you're going to do is place your straps so that, see the princess seam right here? You want your strap to be just to the outside of the princess seam. And remember that thing I just said about which side should be the top and the bottom. I'm doing this right sides together, so I'm making sure my seam line is the one that's on the wrong side. And now the edge of the strap should just be aligned with the princess seam. Okay, and this placement goes for the halter strap as well. I will say this is just a suggestion, so if you feel like you want your straps to be wider or narrower, totally up to you where you want to place them, but I feel like this looks really nice and also gives a lot of support. Okay, so we're just going to pin these straps in place, and now we're just gonna baste these to the suit. So I'm just gonna use a zigzag and like a 1/2 inch seam allowance so that they are ready to go for the final steps when we attach the bra. Now, if you're wondering if your straps are too long or too short, there will be an opportunity to try the suit on and make any adjustments before everything is finalized, okay? So for now, we're just basting them in place, but we will have an opportunity later to try this on for strap length, so just keep that in mind. All right, so I'm gonna baste these, and now we're going to move on to the bra back. Okay, so we are ready to sew the components of the back bodice now. So the first thing we're gonna do is assemble the bra back, that piece that gets hooked together at the center back. And what we're gonna do here is sew each side of the bra back pieces. So you should have one set that is underlined with your power mesh. And this is another section that we experimented with not underlining or underlining and found that the support that the power mesh gives in this bra back is really, really crucial to getting good bust support. So don't skip that step, definitely underline that with your power mesh. And then you have one piece that is the same. These go together in a set, but this one is not underlined. Now, worth noting that the one that is underlined will become the outer bra back, okay? So the one that's further away from your body. Okay, so we are going to pin these two pieces together along the upper and lower edges. So that's the long sides. And we're gonna sew this like a tube, kind of like we just did with the strap, but it's a little differently shaped, right? Gonna sew along these two edges. And actually, I know I pinned it from this side, but I think, you know, I'm gonna sew from this side, just going by that rule we talked about earlier. Whatever is the more stable fabric, you want to sew with that side facing up. Okay, so you wanna be on a zigzag for this because very important that this piece stretches around your body. So let's see, I'm gonna go to about 2.5 wide by 2.5 long on my width and length. Start stitching this upper corner. And no pivoting on this piece. I'm gonna leave both short ends completely open. Okay, so now we're going to turn it around and stitch from the other side. so now we're going to grade our seam allowances. And the shorter seam allowance is going to be the non-underlined side. So just the spandex side. I'm going to trim this one first. Down to about 1/8 of an inch. And then the underlined seam allowance can be about 1/8 of an inch taller than that. Hopefully you can see my stitching here. I kind of keep switching back and forth between pink and white, depending what's going to be more visible for you. And I now have hot pink in my upper thread and white in my bobbin. Okay, and after you have trimmed these down, let's get rid of some threads here. Make sure my iron is heating up. We're going to turn this right side out. And luckily, this has a big enough opening here. It's like a funnel shape, right? So you can just turn that right side out with no tools. And then we are going to press it. And you want, do the same trick that we did with the strap so that you kind of roll that seam line so that it's positioned on the underside of the piece, or this flimsier non-underlined side that I have facing up. Okay, so just roll that seam line out. Give this a nice press. And you can also kind of press it from the top too, I feel like these pieces get very bouncy with all the layers in there, so try to flatten as much as you can without, like I said, concentrating the iron in any one place for a long time. I don't want to melt our fabric. And there we go. Okay. So let's see. The next thing we're going to do is apply the bra back. So let me kind of get my bearings here. It's going to be like this. And this is where the clasp is going to get applied. And the reason I know that is because I'm looking at this notch right here, and it's not in the center of this edge, it's a little bit farther down. So I know that the upper edge of this piece has a bigger stretch before the notch, and the notch is closer to the lower edge, but that's because I designed the pattern and I know that. So just, what you're looking for is the notch to be closer to the lower edge. Same thing on this side. And then position it like this. It should look like the straps are straight across the upper edge, and then they kind of meet in an inverted V on the lower edge. Okay, the other thing I have to do to orient myself is to double check my clasp and how it works. And I, thinking about how you would put on a bra or something, it really doesn't matter which side you put on which side of the clasp, but I kind of liked it so that it, this upper edge comes down like this from the top and then closes. So I'm gonna do mine like this, but depending on the style of your clasp, yours may be different. I would say play around with it and see what feels most comfortable for you to close. Okay, so what we're going to be doing is feeding the ends of the bra backs through these little openings in the clasp. And you may notice that the piece is bigger than the clasp, which is what we want because we want it to gather slightly into the clasp. So here's what you're gonna do. You're going to feed it through there. And hopefully you can just do this by hand, but you might need to grab the end with a pin or something and pull it through. But luckily that did not give me too much trouble. And so you'll see that's kind of what the look you're gonna be going for, is that amount of gathering. And then we're going to fold it in 5/8 of an inch. Now, I do want to call your attention to this for fitting purposes later. If you try your suit on later in the process and you feel like it's too loose around the bra back. You can shorten the bra back here, but a somewhat easier way to do it is to take out your stitches here and feed this further through, right? To lose a little bit of length in the bra back that way. So that's just a tip for later. I am going to place mine about right here. And then turn in my seam allowance. And we're going to be stitching this in place from the top. So I'm going to put a pin right here. Okay, and we're going to be zigzag stitching that in place. Let's go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. And remember, you got to feed the bra back in from the top. Don't come in from the bottom of the clasp, because you want your seam allowance to be on the bottom. And sometimes it gets stuck a little bit like that because it's bulky. And you can just kind of pull it through. And then I know that I wanted mine just a little bit smaller than the last one I made. So that's why I'm pulling it in more than 5/8 of an inch. But what the seam allowance we've included for you is, as always, 5/8 of an inch. Okay, see how nice that's going to look? So what we're gonna do now is do a little zigzag stitch, top stitching right there. And I'm gonna get my protective eyewear out again, because like I said, anytime you're stitching close to metal, and we're definitely stitching close to metal here with this clasp, we wanna be really careful, because obviously what can happen is that we can break a needle and pieces can go flying. So just make sure that you're not gonna hit the metal by using the hand wheel first, okay, to test your positioning. And then we can back stitch here. And anytime you feel nervous, you can stop and use the hand wheel. Like if I'm like, oh, I feel like I'm getting close, just test it with the hand wheel. You know, do a few stitches like that and make sure you're not hitting metal. And take it slow too, as you can see I'm doing. And back stitch. Okay. I have that little knot feature on this machine, which I really like, which it just does a bunch of stitches on top of itself to really secure a piece. Okay, so you can see that I got just like a little fold in here. Don't worry about that. That's kind of part of the look of this, is to have like a little bit of a gather there. So don't worry. And the next thing I'm gonna do is trim close. Now, if you haven't tried your suit on yet, don't do this part yet, because you may have extra, you may need to gain a little extra length, or you may need to add more. I would say just save that step for the very end, but that's what you're gonna do, is just trim as close as possible. Zigzagging gives you a sort of nice, neat finish on the inside, and then on the outside, we see this. All right, so I'm gonna repeat the same thing on this side of the clasp, and then look how beautiful this is going to look, right? So then we'll do the lower back, and then we'll be ready to attach these pieces to the suit front. Okay, let me see. So we've done the upper back, the bra back, and now we're going to move on to the lower back, which is that piece with the hook and eye closure at center back. But first we need to sew the actual pieces themselves. So just like with the bra back, you have one piece that is underlined with the power mesh and one piece that isn't. This is one set that's already constructed, so that's what it's going to look like. And these are those funny pieces. This is the side seam of the suit. Remember, we talked about wraps around to the front, and this is the center back here. Okay, so I'm going to put these right sides together, and I'm going to sew from my more stable side, or the power mesh side, and the only thing we're sewing here is this upper edge. Okay, so get on your zigzag stitch if you're not already. And we're gonna sew this upper edge. Okay, and just like our last piece that we sewed, the non-underlined piece is going to be graded shorter. And the other seam allowance, the one with the underlining, is going to be graded slightly taller. There we go. Gotta get the iron going again. Okay, so now all we need to do with this piece is think of this as essentially the lining. You're gonna turn this in. Oh, and not a bad idea to do a few clips here. See how this is such a, well, it's not a super curved seam, but it has a slight curve to it. Good idea to do some little clips along this seam so that when we turn the lining side to the inside and press this edge, it curves nicely, okay? Those clips will help with that. All right, so now we're just gonna roll this seam line out to the edge. This is normally the kind of thing that you would understitch, right? Because you want this to roll slightly in, but we don't understitch this because we want to retain the most stretch as possible on this upper edge right here, okay? So the next thing we're going to do is pin all these free edges here because we only sewed around that one edge. So we have 3 open edges. You're going to pin around these edges and we're gonna baste them together so they're not flopping all around what we're trying to do. So pin in place, and now I'm going to use a long zigzag to just baste these edges together. All basted. So you should have 2 pieces that look like this. This is our center back. I'm gonna go grab all of my hook and eye tape supplies. So what you need is your hook and eye guard, that pattern piece that you cut out in your spandex. And then you need your hook and eye tape. So let's go grab those and I will meet you back here. Okay, we are ready to do our hook and eye closure on the lower back of the swimsuit. So this is a few steps, but I'm actually very proud of this finish. I think it comes together really nicely. So I think, you know, once you see it in action, you'll totally get it. So you have a few pieces going on here. You have your 2 lower backs that we just sewed. You need your hook and eye tape. The eyes are gonna go on the left side as you're looking at it, the hook's on the right side. And then you need your hook and eye guard. And I've gone ahead and sewn this piece. It needs to be sewn right sides together, stitch along the upper edge, lower edge at 5/8 of an inch, turn it right side out, you know, trim those corners, turn it right side out, press it, and then baste that raw edge together so that we have this little piece with a fold on this edge and seams on the top and bottom. Got it? Okay, so first thing we're gonna do is on the eye side of the hook and eye tape, you're going to trim close to the hook at the top there. I'm sorry, the eye. So as close as possible to the metal there, all right? Because we want the eye to be as close as possible at the top so you don't get any gaping at the top. And I would actually say we can trim off the bottom one here because you don't need an eye in the seam allowance down there. That's not going to do you any good. So I would say just trim that away. And then this is going to be positioned right at the top, and that's going to be your lowest eye there. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is fold the eye tape in half. And then we're going to align those 2 edges with the raw edges of the lower bodice back, and we're going to pin in place. This is going to need to be stitched next by machine, so Another protective eyewear moment. There's a lot of those in this suit, so, you know, protect those eyes. Okay, so do a few pins there like that. And now we're gonna stitch just real close to the edge right here just to secure those layers. Use a straight stitch for this. Don't use a zigzag because we don't wanna be stitching close to that metal. Okay, where did my glasses go? Here we go. And I would also recommend using a zipper foot. And here's my zipper foot to help you position your stitching away from the metal, right? Like a foot away from the metal. I'm gonna move my needle a little bit closer to the left. And then we're just going to, actually I'm gonna move this down just a little bit so we don't see any white on the top of this piece. And you see I'm just checking my positioning of the needle to make sure I'm not going to hit that metal. This is a super fussy area to sew. Just have to warn you, you kind of have to help feed it through. It doesn't like that corner up there, at least my machine doesn't. But this stitching is all going to be covered, so if it's not super neat, don't worry, because we're going to put the hook and eye guard on top of it. So now, yeah, you can see how not neat my stitching is right there, but don't worry about it because what's going to happen next is you're going to take your hook and eye guard and place it over the stitching that you just did. Align those top edges and align all the raw edges on the right side here. And now we're going to do another line of stitching. And what you're seeing here is exactly what you should be seeing, that this is a finished edge that is 5/8 of an inch shorter than the raw edge. Okay, so now we're going to sew all these bulky layers together as close to the edge as possible, being very careful here. And again, it's a little bit of a pain to feed it through at this upper corner, but my advice would be to just kind of try to guide it through, pulling from the back. Okay, and again, the appearance of this stitching isn't so important because you're not going to see it from the outside of the garment. And it's a pretty tricky area to sew, so don't worry too much. And if it really gives you a lot of trouble, like your fabric is too thick, your machine's not cooperating, you're scared of sewing on your hooks and eyes, whatever it is, I would say you could even hand stitch this edge. You could just, you know, with a whip stitch, come around there and just, you know, use 2 strands of threads and really make sure that it's nice and secure. That would be my advice. Okay, so now we have all these layers stitched together. And this is so cool. What's going to happen next? We are going to flip this to the inside so that only the eyes are exposed right here, just slightly exposed. And now you're going to press it. And your seam allowances should be turned in 5/8 of an inch. Okay, and now we're going to do some hand stitching. So the first bit of hand stitching is going to be on this right side. We're going to do a little slip stitch between the layers here. So I'm going to grab some thread and a hand sewing needle. And I'm doing a single strand. You can do a double strand if you prefer. Okay, so now we're just gonna work between these layers and definitely try to position your stitching as much between the layers as possible, because that will kind of help this look the most beautiful and hidden. So I'm kind of like grabbing my slip stitch, that sort of like underside of the fold. And you kind of have to work around the hooks. I'm sorry, the eyes. So yeah, I'm just kind of grabbing the underside of that fold and see how it's just kind of like seamlessly blending together. Looks really nice. You can even come up through the eye like I just did. And I know this probably seems like a lot of work. I will say that, you know, some of the first methods that we did had visible top stitching next to the hook and eye tape. And I will say there is nothing harder than that. And it also didn't look that great. So I was really happy that I was able to come up with this method that looks really beautiful and is also, I feel, a little easier to sew. And I feel like that, you know, the hand stitching, I know a lot of you don't like hand stitching, but I do feel like it gives you a ton of control in this instance where, you know, sewing on the machine feels super out of control. Okay, and make sure to really secure it at this upper edge. And I just lost my thread. Okay, so let me re-knot this. Okay, so just make sure to secure at the upper edge, like that. And now we're going to work from the inside. If you still have a nice long tail of thread, you can even just kind of tack your thread on the inside and continue with the same strand. This is really a whip stitch here, okay? So this doesn't need to look as pretty because it's not on the outside of the suit. Really what you're gonna be doing is going through the lower suit back and grab the power mesh layer with your needle, okay? You don't want to stitch all the way to the outside because then you'll see the stitches, but you want to anchor your stitching into the power mesh for extra security, and it will help so that when you're wearing your suit and it's kind of tight, you know, and it's kind of straining a bit at the lower back, like especially if you're moving, you won't see the hooks and eyes pulling away here. Okay, so it helps to really, okay, so now we're gonna go right over next to that stitch, anchor into the upper layer and the power mesh. And you know, these stitches don't need to be hidden. It actually helps to secure this free layer here by stitching right over the edge. Kind of helps finish it. Okay, so we're gonna stitch all the way down this edge. So keep going, and so you'll see you're getting like a nice finish there, and then this is going to be a beautiful finish for your eyes down here. Okay, so we sewed the left side with the eyes, and see how nice that looks? Like, so couture. That looks great. So now we're gonna do the right side, which is the side with the hooks. And I trimmed my hook tape the same way that I did the eye, right? So just right above an eye, and then the same length on the bottom, or a hook on the top, and then the same length on the bottom. And now we're gonna do essentially the same first step, which is to fold the tape in half and then position it so all of the edges are aligned. And now we're going to stitch along this little edge here. Get that eyewear going again. And now I am still using my zipper foot. I think it helps to start a little bit in on the tape if you can, like I just did. And again, this stitching is not going to show, so don't worry about what it looks like. At least it's not going to show from the outside. Okay. So, what we're going to do next is fold this to the inside, just like we did with the eye side. So everything gets folded in 5/8 of an inch, and the hook should be slightly hidden on the inside, like this, okay? So you want maybe about 1/8 of an inch extending past that tape. And then I'm going to just press this. Okay, and now this is super easy. It's similar to what we did on the other side. I'm just gonna explain it to you because I feel like you've got this. All right, so we're going to do the whip stitching along this side, again, anchoring it to the power mesh underlayer there. And then on this side, you just need to do a little slip stitch to hold this free layer down to the fold here. And those stitches don't really need to be anchored to any underlayer, just to that top layer of spandex to get it to lay flat. Okay, so once that's done, you'll have this really beautiful back closure with hooks and eyes that has a really nice little guard there so you don't feel the hooks and eyes against your body, and no visible stitching. Okay, so I know that was a lot, but I know you can do it. So do those steps, and then the next thing we're gonna move on to is sewing the two back pieces to the bodice up front. Okay, everyone, so we are ready to sew our lower back bodice and our bra back to our front bodice. So let's just take a look at what we have here. We just finished applying the hook and eye tape and your hook and eye guard. So this is looking beautiful, and see how nicely hidden that is once the hooks and eyes are done up. And this will protect you on the inside from those rubbing against your body. So I love this finish. I hope you do too. It looks really nice. So this is our lower back unit right here, and you're just gonna treat it as one piece, and it's gonna get sewn as one to the panty or whatever bottom you're doing down here. And then I also have the bra back laid out here with our beautiful closure sewn in here. And I just want to say that in the instructions, it had you attach the bra back to the bodice front right after you sewed it. So if you've already done that step, it's fine. I wanted to show this all as one step in the process, just so that it kind of clicks how it all goes together for you. Okay, so let's grab your bodice front. So here's your beautiful bodice front. Remember, your straps are already basted on here. Your halter strap or your shoulder straps, whichever one that you did. And we are going to think of this as just sewing side seams. But the difference is that the back is in two pieces, right? So the first thing you can do is take your upper back or your bra back, and this is going to go right sides together, okay? So you should be seeing the wrong side here with the trimmed in seam allowances next to the clasp. And you have notches on your bra back here to match to this seam on the bodice front. Okay, so you can match that there. And then what it should look like here is that you should have 5/8 of an inch seam allowance at the top before your bra back. This should match your upper cup seam, this notch. And then the bottom should match the notch on the bodice front side seam. Okay, so it should look about like that with this seam allowance on your upper cup on the front bodice, extending about 5/8 of an inch beyond the bra back. All right, so I'm gonna pin it again on this side. And if it's not matching up the way it should be, remember that one thing that can happen is that your seam allowances kind of get folded in on the bra back. So if you need to, you can always repress those, you know, kind of like squish them out and then repress if you're seeing that it's not quite matching at 5/8 of an inch up here. Okay, so we're just pinning these in place for now. And then we're going to take our lower back with the hook and eyes, flip it around so it's right sides together. And this is what I really wanted to show you. So remember this crazy curve right here. This actually needs to get straightened out. Okay, so it's like this naturally. And then it needs to be straightened out so that it can match the front bodice. And remember, the reason for this is so we have that seam that curves around to the front to create a nice line and also a comfortable place to put boning. So we're gonna pin these in place like that. And then same thing on the other side, just like straighten it out. And then let's talk a little bit about how these should match. See this like little corner right here? That actually points downward and matches the lower edge of the bodice front. This gets straightened out so that these two pieces get sewn together in a straight line. And then right here, you should be seeing the bra back and the lower bodice back meeting exactly, okay? You don't want to see any gap between those pieces. All right, so now that you have these pinned in place, we're just going to sew the side seams. So I'm going to have this at a zigzag, a narrow zigzag, and I'm going to start stitching at the top of the bra back, and you're using your full 5/8 of an inch seam allowance here. And as you're sewing these, just make sure to keep everything nice and flush on this edge. And if you need to repin as you're stitching, that's totally fine. Make sure everything is nice and smooth there. And then when you get to the point where these two pieces meet, just make sure that they stay squished together. And here, where we had to straighten this curved piece, you're gonna see a lot of this excess right here, and that's totally fine. Just keep stitching, and if you get to a point like this where there's a fold, just stop with your needle down, lift up your presser foot slightly. I'm using my knee lift here. Kind of move that fold out of the way and keep going. And here's that funny little corner. So, stitching, everything should meet just the way you want it to at that 5/8 of an inch seam line. Okay, there's one side seam sewn. And now we're gonna go to the other side and do the same thing. So I'm just gonna flip it around, and now I'm stitching from the bottom. At the top. And there we we go. So now we have our side seam sewn and we have a complete bodice, which is great. Now, I do want to talk about inserting boning into these side seams. Okay, so you do not have to do this, but if you want to, it's a great way to get a smoother line on the sides of your suit. And also, if you're making this strapless, I would highly recommend doing it because it will just help your suit stay up where it's supposed to be. All right, so the easiest way to do this is to just next to your seam here, about 3/8 of an inch over, do a line of straight stitching. Okay, so just in the seam allowances like this, like so. Now that is an easy way to do it. It's not my favorite way to do it because you still see all of this exposed seam allowance. So I do want to show you an alternate way to do it. So just to reiterate, the first way would be to do a line of straight stitches through your entire seam allowance here. So all the layers here, 3/8 of an inch over, and so then you'll be creating a casing in the seam allowance to insert your boning. The problem with that, I mean, it's not terrible, and we did it in some of the samples for the shoot, and it looked totally great. But I do just want to show you an alternate because there's a really nice, neat way to do this with your boning channeling like you used on the bra. Now I gotta find it. Oh, I found it. Okay, here it is. So remember we used this on the foam cups on the bra. You can also use it on the side seams. And the way you would do this is to just pin the channeling to the seam allowance. And actually before you do it, one step that you can take is to grade these seam allowances a little bit just to reduce some bulk. So the bodice front, you can trim these down slightly, these side seam allowances, because you'll notice it's getting a little bulky here. And we're adding another layer, so if you just want to trim, even just that little bit trimmed away is going to help a lot with the bulk. All right, so now let's take this boning channel and pin it to your seam allowances like this. And you're getting all of the bodice out of the way. We're just isolating the seam allowances here. And you're pinning your stitching just next to the zigzag that you just did. Not on top of it, but just next to it. All the way down that side seam. And then trim the channeling at the bottom. Okay, so now we are going to go to a straight stitch. And we're going to stitch along the left side of the boning channel. About a 1/16 of an inch from the edge, just a little edge stitch here. There's one side of the channel stitched, and now I'm going to repeat that on the other side of the channel, so the right side. Hopefully you can see the reason I really like this is because it's creating a nice, smooth, firm finish for these seam allowances. and it's going to look super nice and neat on the inside of your suit. Okay, so see how nice that's going to look? So the next thing you can do is trim the seam allowance behind the boning channel. Don't trim away the boning channel at all. Might actually help to do this from the wrong side. Actually, no, I like doing it this way. There we go. See how nice and neat that looks now? And now we're going to insert a bone into this channel. So good news, I got my favorite cutters back. These are the Greenlee 722. I think I said 822 earlier. These are great. You can get them on Amazon and they just snip right through your boning. Super smoothly. All right, so we want to make this bone so that it's shorter than the seam allowances on the top and the bottom. So I come in like about 3/4 of an inch from the top because you still want a little room to stitch as well, right? So 3/4 of an inch from the top, 3/4 of an inch from the bottom. And then you just cut right there. So good, right? Okay, so now I'm going to, you don't have to watch this, but I'm going to finish the end of this bone and then it gets inserted into this channel. And then you're going to close the top and bottom of the channel with stitching, just like you did on your bra boning channels. And make sure to use a zipper foot and your protective eyewear. Okay, so I'm gonna finish this up with the boning and then we will meet to talk about next steps. Okay, we have completed our outer bodice, right? So we have the front unit, we have our strap basted on, the strap of your choice. The entire back is sewn with the bra back and the lower bodice. And I showed you that cool clean finish method for doing your boning channels on the side seams. Now, just a quick note about that. Those are going to get pressed to, you don't have to actually physically press them. They are going to get finger pressed towards the front and they will remain like that when we sew the bra on. Speaking of the bra, it's fully constructed from way back, right? So we have this and you're just gonna set it to the side and that's one of the last steps is we're going to attach that. But for now, you are going to decide which bottom you're going to attach to your bodice. And we are giving you a separate bottoms video where we show you how to construct each of them. So go to that video if you need help constructing them. I'm gonna be doing the little skirt on this one. So we're gonna come back in the next scene with our fully constructed bottoms ready to put on to our bodice. Okay, we're ready to attach our bottoms to our bodices. So I am doing the little skirt option with the full panty underneath. So they're all basted together at the upper edge. And one thing I want to note is that it's really important that you have some sort of stay stitching or even just your basting, underlining stitches at the V point is really important because we are going to need to clip into the V points at center front and center back, whatever bottom you're doing, right? Because of this V point on that basque waist. Now, this is really similar to, and I'm going to do the same thing on the back, and you can trim right at that seam line, center back. Just do a little clip. If you watched last month's video, and I hope you did, this is really similar to how we set the yoke into the gardener top, right? Because it has two opposing V shapes, which is what you're going to see when you start to pin these together. All right, so we have our bodice. We are going to pin this right sides together with our bottoms. And I'll start at center front so you can see what I'm talking about. Now, I recommend pinning from the clip side, so the skirt side for me. That's my clip. This is my basque V point on the bodice. And see how that clip is going to need to spread to meet the V point? That's what you want to see. And it's a little bit tricky to stitch around here because you're going to have to pivot here, but not a big deal. All right, so now we're going to continue to pin around the entire waistline seam. You do have notches that should match up to your princess seams. And as we're approaching the side seam on the panty skirt combo, I really want to take a moment to highlight, again, this is not a garment where your side seams on your bodice and your bottoms match up, which I know is weird, but again, it's just because of this cool curved side seam that we did on the bodice. So your side seam on your bottom will actually match this notch that's just like 1.5 inches or so from that curved side seam on the bodice. All right, so a little bit funny, but I feel like it really gives us that Rosemary Reed flavor. All right, so you can just kind of distribute this. You know that my advice is always to match your match points first, right? So my next match point is the back princess seam notch. I'm going to match that first, and then you can fill in pins between the match points. Now I'm approaching center back where I have another clip. And this one's a little tricky because this is our hook and eye opening here. So you want this clip to match the center of the hook and eye opening. And it's really bulky there, and we can trim that down later in the process. All right, so we've gone from center front to center back, and I'm going to continue pinning the same way around the other half. Get your straps out of the way. And here on the boning channels, make sure that the boning and those side seams are facing the front bodice. Okay, and now I'm going to start stitching around the waistline. You're going to need to pivot at center front and center back at those basque V points where you have the clip. And I would not start at one of those V points. I'm going to talk you through how to sew it, but don't start there. It's better to start at, say, your bottom side seam, okay? And I would recommend using a zipper foot for this if you have boning in your side seams, okay? So if you did that optional step of adding the boning to the side seams, we're gonna be stitching very close to the boning on this step. So get out that zipper foot, get out these protective glasses, and just be careful when you're getting close to the boning. You can kind of make sure as you get closer, use your hand wheel. I can feel where the boning is right there. All right, I'm starting at my side seam. Of the panty skirt combo. And I'm going to start stitching here, and you can use a very narrow zigzag is really the best thing to use here. So about 1.5 on your width, and then 2.5 on your length is fine. Okay, I am getting really close to my boning channel, so I'm just going to be super paranoid here and use my hand wheel. I do not like breaking needles. It really freaks me out, so I just like to take it very slow. And see, I'm glad I did it that way because I just hit a little bit of boning. All right, so I'm gonna need to stop for a second and push that boning up a little bit further in the channel. And if you need to, you can even, take it, if your boning is too long for the seam, you can take it out and trim it down, all of that. So I'm just going to take it slow as I get there. And when I get to this V point where it's clipped, where it matches the center front bodice seam, I'm going to stop with my needle down, and then I'm going to lift up my presser foot. I'm going to move all of those folds out of the way and continue stitching along the opposing side of the V point. And keep going. All right, so you're going to continue stitching around your waistline seam, being careful of the next boning channel at the side seam, and also remembering to pivot at your center back V point. All right, you can see that I have a bottom attached to my bodice on the swimsuit, looking so cute. And here's what you're looking for at the center front point. You don't want to see any puckers there, and that's what doing that step of stay stitching and then clipping should help with. So this is how it's going to look. Your back, you should also have a nice V point right below your hook and eye opening. I did want to mention these waistline seam allowances. So, I mean, I probably wouldn't do anything with them yet until you've tried it on for fit, but you can grade them, right? So just to get rid of a little extra bulk, but I would probably recommend just trimming them as one. So you have, kind of like a 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch wide seam allowances along the waistline. And if you like to serge your seam allowances, you could also do some serging here just to finish them as one. That's one option, but you don't need to since the seam allowances will not fray. Okay, the other thing I want to mention as an option at the very end of the process, if you like, one thing I loved on the Rosemary Reed vintage suits that I have is they always had a line of top stitching around the basque V point on the waist. So that's something that you can do as well on the front of the suit only, okay? So in this case, I would recommend from boning channel to boning channel, so side seam on the bodice to side seam, I would clip into your seam allowances there, press them up, and then top stitch through all the layers a 1/4 inch from that basque seam line. And it looks really cute because you'll have a little V point there, and it'll just, if you feel like you're not getting a defined enough V point and you want it to stand out a little bit more, that's a really fun thing that you can do, but obviously optional. Okay, so now is the time to try on your suit to make sure that everything is fitting the way you want. You can make any little alterations at this point. You also want to test your strap length if you're doing the shoulder strap like I am. So these shoulder straps are going to get pinned to the inside of the bra back, right? About there. So what I would do before you try it on is have the lower edge, let me open this clasp for you. Have the lower edge of the strap meet the lower edge of the bra back, and you can pin them in place. I would use something really strong here, like a big safety pin or something like that, so it doesn't come flying off if you use a little pin like I do. All right, but just to give you an idea, you're gonna wanna pin it at the top and bottom and pin it right there. And then when you try it on, see if you need to make them shorter to adjust. All right, okay, so try on your suit and then we will come back with sewing on the bra. Okay, so if you are using the shoulder straps, I just want to show you how I stitched mine on. I needed to shorten mine by about 1 inch. So you can see I have some excess here, but I pinned it in place where I wanted it. And then also it's kind of up to you where you want to place it on the bra back. The only thing I would say is you want to be consistent with how far it is from this center back fold on both sides of the bra back, right? So if you prefer your straps a little wider, you could set them a little wider. It's really sort of flexible for you here. I like mine a little closer to the bra back clasp, okay? So that's why I put mine here. But you'll see that I have about 1 inch overhang here. I pinned them in place so that they're on the wrong side of the bra back. And then I did a line of edge stitching with a straight stitch about 1/8 of an inch from the top of the bra back and 1/8 of an inch from the bottom. And now we're going to trim away this excess. Being very careful not to cut away our bra back. Now, another way of doing this would be to fold under the strap so you get a clean finish here. But the drawback of that method is that you have a lot of bulk and it can be kind of uncomfortable on your back to have a bump, you know, right where the strap is. So because this spandex swimwear fabric does not fray at all, I find it preferable to keep things as flat and bulk free as possible. But sometimes you do sacrifice a little bit of neatness there. But I think it looks pretty good. Okay, so we're going to pin our bra to our bodice. So what you want to do is get the straps out of the way completely. So no matter what strap style you're using, you want to fold everything down and towards center front, okay? Because what we're doing is we're isolating this section right here, the side seams and the neckline where the bra is going to be attached. If you've sewn the Charm Patterns Jane set, this step might look really familiar to you, so you probably know what you're doing already. All right, so we're going to pin these right sides together. Make sure you match your center front V points here. That's very important on the lining of the bra and the outer bodice. The straps are going to get sandwiched in between. So we're pinning along the upper neckline. And we're also pinning along the side seam. So you have options here. You can sew along the side seam, so finishing this piece in essentially a 3-sided rectangle with a V point, right? My preference is, because I don't like sewing around boning channels, is to do the upper neckline in one step, turn everything to the inside, and then hand stitch this, okay? So that's the way I'm going to do it, but just know that it is possible to do this all by machine, especially if you are familiar with how the Jane set is sewn and you feel comfortable with how you sewed that, then you will get a completely machine finished finish there. But like I said, just with my boning channel right there, I'm gonna have to go to the inside of that bone. So I prefer personally to do it by hand. So that's the way I'm gonna do it today. So just continue folding, pinning along this upper edge. And so if you're just doing the neckline like I am, you're going to put those raw edges together at the outer edge of the bra. Okay, so this is definitely a zipper foot moment because we are stitching around those boning channels. And I'm going to use a straight stitch. sure that we're at 5/8 of an inch. Now you're going to be very careful stitching near your boning. And I'm just going to stitch across this neckline, pivoting at that sweetheart V point. Just being very careful of my side seam boning here. And you're stitching, if you're stitching from the bra side, you should see that your stitching will be just next to the cut edge of the foam, because remember the foam did not have seam allowances on it, because we didn't want to get any of that bulky foam in the seam. Sewing over the strap, and here's our bra boning channel. And I'm stitching towards center front, towards our pivot point. So make sure you stop with your needle down and pivot. I'm just going to go straight across my side seam. But if you were doing everything in one step, this is where you would pivot and continue down the side seam. All right, so a few things you want to check here. You want to make sure that your center front V point is going to look good once you turn everything right side out. And I'm just checking that everything is flush where the bra back meets the side seam. All right, and now we're going to get into trimming and grading these seam allowances. You can't just flip this right in, as you can probably see, because you're going to get a lot of bunching at the center front V point. So we're going to do a lot of work to grade these seam allowances and do a little bit of notching as well. Okay, so we're ready to trim and grade these seam allowances on the neckline. So I would recommend starting from the bra side, trimming this lining for the bra seam allowance down so it's very short, like 1/8 of an inch. So that will be your shortest seam allowance. Straps can be trimmed slightly taller than that, or close to your basting stitch. And then the outer bodice neckline will be slightly taller than that. Okay, so we're really trimming away these seam allowances. So I'm going to continue like this across the entire neckline that I just stitched. Okay, there we go. Now, the next thing I would say is you really want to clip to this center front V-point, about like that. You can also trim away these corners a little bit at the V-point. Don't trim too close to the V-point. You kind of want to strike a balance between making sure there's going to be any bunching on the right side of the V-point and also not clipping so far that the stitches start to strain there. So you can kind of check yourself. Yeah, that looks like it's going to be good. You don't want to see any little diagonal lines folding away there. And you can also go back at this point and reinforce if you feel like you need to, that little V-point right there with another line of stitching right on top of it. Okay, and the other thing I want to show you is that we're gonna, because the upper edge of this cup is very curved, we're gonna want to do some little notches like this. So about every ½ inch or so, we are going to cut out a little triangle like that. Whoops. Okay, and the next thing we'll be doing is understitching the neckline. I'm actually going to go and reinforce that V-point real quick on mine so that you can see how it's done in case you want to just make sure it's not going to pull away at all from the stitching. So you would just follow your last line of stitching using a straight stitch. And you can also kind of back stitch at the V-point. And then pivot just to give yourself a little bit more stability at an unstable point. There you go. Okay. Now we're going to turn the bra to the inside, and we're going to be doing a line of understitching along this neckline. Now you can see that there's a line of stitching already there, and that's from when I stitched the foam to the bra lining, 1/8 of an inch from the foam edge. Okay, so if you already see some stitching there, that is why. And we're just going to stitch next to it. Or on top of it, as it may be. All right, so we're understitching, we're holding out the bra from the suit. We are making sure that our seam allowances are folded towards the bra so that we're stitching through all the seam allowances right now. And we're understitching about 1/16 of an inch from the neckline seam line. And just as with any understitching, you're going to need to continue to make sure that your seam allowances are folded where they need to be, and you're going to spread that seam line open with your fingers. There's my strap, so it gets a little bulky here. And you're going to need to keep rearranging your seam allowances so that they are underneath your understitching. Pivot at your V-point. Okay, so this understitching is what is going to help the bra roll to the inside of the swimsuit and give you a nice crisp edge here. Now this is one area that you can do a little pressing on using an iron and some steam. Your V point right there, you want to make sure stays pressed really nice and crisp. And then the rest of this neckline edge as well. But let's talk about how you're going to finish the inside. So you're going to turn these boning channels so that they're facing the bodice front. Fold in the seam allowance on the bra side seam, and then you can just kind of pin it in place like so to the inside here. And then hand stitch to finish. And even just something like a whip stitch is fine here. It's more important that it be very secure than it be like super cute little couture stitches that are never gonna show. You really want a lot of stability here. So that's gonna get folded in on this side. It's gonna cover the boning channel. And we are going to pin it and then stitch it in place. Okay, so believe it or not, after that, your suit is completely done. I love this process because I feel like once you get the bra on, you're just done, okay? So I'm gonna do my hand stitching and a little bit of pressing, and then we will get to look at this suit totally finished.
All right, everyone, I have finished my pink polka dot fantasy Esther swimsuit. I know that was a lot of sewing. I know it's a lot of steps, but I hope you can see how satisfying it is and how worth it is to make the 50s swimsuit of your dreams with all of that beautiful inner structure and support to really make you feel fabulous at the beach or the pool or wherever you're going in your Esther. Now you've earned your merit badge in swimwear, so I hope you feel really proud. And like I said, just take it one step at a time. You can do this. I know you all can sew this swimsuit. And don't forget to join the Discord server, and we will be creating a channel for the Esther swimsuit so you can post your muslins, ask questions, all of that. So thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for being patrons, and I hope you love this project, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.